everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of our brand new podcast. Sam and Scott are watching Watchmen. Welcome, welcome. My name is Scott.
Hey, my name is Sam.
And we're going to be doing some watching of Watchmen.
All right.
So I wanted to say a brief thank you to everybody who's listening right now, although it's only a half thank you because you still have to leave us a 5-star review.
Or you'll get the business.
You will get the business. And wanted to do a brief introduction. So who are we? We are a team, a podcasting duo, a dynamic one.
All right.
So
I like that.
I like it too. And we're the Nerdcyclopedia Transcontinental Podcast Corporation, which sounds like a big name, and I picked it that way on purpose.
All right.
But we do podcasts on here. Our main podcast, Nerdcyclopedia, is a listing of a discussion of nerd items done by letter of the alphabet. You can find that over on our other feed at Nerdcyclopedia Podcasts. Mm-hmm. Super awesome. Mm-hmm. And I guess the number one question our listeners probably have at this point is, why are we watching Watchmen?
All right.
Right? I mean, that's
Great
a question I
question.
got.
Great question.
That's a good question. And, for me, I got to say, it's just a couple reasons why I wanted to do this podcast. Number one, I'm just a lifelong fan of these comics. I've loved these stories. So that's something that for me is a big deal. And I'm a Twitch streamer. I stream, old video games I play for speed. It's called speed running. If you never knew that was, I'm a big Pittsburgh sports fan. And one reason I wanted to do this is because I love HBO so much. And they've just given us so much entertainment. I want to give back to HBO for free. That's what I wanted to do. And also, as you might you'll hear, I'm sure, during the course of the podcast, I have a couple dogs. They tend to be big and loud, so they bump in here.
We love them. They're part of the family.
That's true. So how about you, Sam? Who are you, and why are you watching Watchmen?
All right, my name is Sam, as I said in the beginning, and Watchmen has been a very big influence as far as my comic book reading, life. Oh my goodness. Watchmen came out in the mid 80s, and it really defined for me how I read comics going from as a kid to as a teenager, because getting into being just a comic book fan, period, eventually you had to grow up. You actually had to, get more mature, and Watchmen was a good bridge into like the more mature ways of reading comic books, instead of just like straight, simple, tropey stories from like the 70s, 60s and everything. Watchmen really brought things into like the day and dates and everything, if you want to call that. But that and The Dark Knight was really the most the big influences as far as comics and stuff. So I can't wait to actually dive into this these 12 issues and the world of the Watchmen, and actually the different Watchmen stuff that surrounds it, as far as like this new show that's coming out in 2019, this year. Sometime this year. We don't know when, but
who knows?
They gave us.
If I were a betting man, I'd bet sometime right around the end of Game of Thrones.
There
if I was a betting man.
Ooh, well, yeah. Oh, yeah. But yeah. I'm also a sports fan as well, and and I love HBO too. They make some really good stuff, and they're really known for their good quality material, from The Sopranos to Game of Thrones to like stuff like Sex and the City. They're really yes, there you go. And they're really known for their good quality, TV shows, and they're always winning awards and is in the conversation year after year. Sunday nights is what you expect from HBO for good quality, good quality TV show. So that's why I'm watching Watchmen.
Awesome. And I'm also watching it because Trent Reznor's doing the score.
There you go. Oh, man.
And it's going to be awesome.
That's just going to be crazy. Oh,
yeah.
and now that you mentioned that, Damon Lindelof is doing he's an actual showrunner. One of my favorite showrunners from Lost. So, my favorite show of all time, although, the ending is divisive. I loved it. A lot of people hated it. But
this is probably a good spot to interject. Mm-hmm. That if we say something you don't like on our shows, we expect you to just reply to us with #HateSam, for instance, if you hate Lost. If you don't like something I say, #HateScott. Those are the rules.
Those are the rules.
Keep the rules here.
All right, so yeah, like I say, he's one of my favorite creators, showrunners, and everything. He did The Leftovers, which was another HBO show. Great show. Actually started off slow, but ended off as like a really good, good top quality show. So yeah, just looking forward to diving into this whole world and talking with my man Scott, and we're gonna we're gonna pound it and smash it.
we are going to be smashing it. That is my number one thing. I love to smash.
All right.
So we're going to get things started here, and before we jump into how we wanted to start off here, which is a brief primer for kind of a recap, so to speak, and discussion of some of the themes of the original work, I wanted to say you can contact us at watching at nerdcyclopedia.com, which is going to be our main feedback email address. So if you don't like something you hear, or you want to hear something, or you do like something that you hear, or you're bored, send us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, we definitely do. Also, follow us on social media, Nerdcyclopedia, on your different outlets and platforms, Twitter, Facebook. Instagram, we'll get a new Instagram thing coming up. If you want to see our faces,
No.
Maybe you don't.
I don't think they do.
We may be even coming out with a YouTube channel. I mean, everything is just up in the air, guys. So we definitely want you to follow us, and we will just get your comments and feedbacks on what you think about this podcast.
Absolutely, and that's the other half of the conversation we're looking forward to having. I think is hearing from the fandom and hearing from the listenership, and if there's something you want us to talk about, let us know. We're more than happy to diverge into something of your interest if you let us know. So.
Yeah, we'll actually be starting a Facebook group too, a Watchmen Facebook group. We'll be putting that together, so just be on the lookout. As far as that as well.
Awesome. All right. So without further ado, now that the housekeeping stuff is done, and who likes housekeeping?
Ooh, sweet.
Yeah, so now that that's all done, we can start having fun.
Yes, sir.
But for me, we want to start having fun, and I know that, the main point of this podcast is so that we can talk about the show. But there's a lot of people that are going to watch the show that maybe aren't going to be as super familiar with the source material. So we wanted to do a brief primer introduction. We're going to talk about the comic itself first before we jump into the rest of the media. I hope that's okay with everybody. Sam, is it okay with you?
No, I'm fine with it. Let's start from the beginning.
I mean, since you're watching Watchmen first, since it's Sam then Scott are watching Watchmen.
In that order.
I figure I ask your permission first. Okay. Am I allowed to watch it yet?
Permission granted.
Right. So, all right. So there's a few. So Watchmen is a dystopian story, and it's set in an alternate 1985. That's the first thing to tell you. That was also contemporaneous when its release. So it's not a period piece so much as it is a piece of the period, right?
Right.
Okay. So I know that's a slim definition, but that's important. I think the way it would seem different if you wrote this story about 1985 and 2019. So.
Probably really, really different. So
yeah, very different. So it's 1985, and a few things that are important for this to kind of tell you about a few things here. So number one, superhero comics failed. They never really caught on. So Superman came out in 1938, and they're not a thing in this universe. They have pirate comics,
right,
which should make an appearance in this story. And the real lasting legacy of those sort of comic books are the Max Adventurers, which is real-life people who have no powers and who dress up and solve crimes and do other things as they like, right?
Well, the big irony about that, since superhero comics actually failed, it's kind of ironic that real life, not so much superheroes, but like you said, Max Adventurers, started coming on the scene. So if you want to look at it as sort of like a replacement for what the fantasy was, like in real life, you had, superheroes was a thing in real life. So, I mean, that's what it was. But after Superman came out, it was a plethora of superheroes just all over. In this universe, the superhero comics failed, but real life Masked Avengers, people that actually had the balls to dress in mask and fight crime was a thing. So the fantasy wasn't there anymore.
That's right. So they got all the negative stuff that comes from, all the stuff that we don't really think about when you look at Golden Age or Silver Era superhero stories. Like there's buildings getting crashed through, you know what I mean? Like the scene in Dawn of Justice, Batman v Superman,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, okay, it's a terrible movie, but at the beginning when Superman's having that fight, and he was destroying Gotham City, he's destroying Metropolis, right?
Right.
And Batman's sort of having to deal with it.
Right.
I think there's something to the idea that these actions would all have consequences, and there's a consequentialism to Watchmen, and it takes like time, and it takes effect, and it really applies those sort of pressures
Right.
to the golden era sort of archetype of a superhero, and it makes it turns it into something that's a lot more adult, like you said,
Right.
than what it was before. So that's our intro. I also want to say this: I like to think of every character in this, other than one, the superheroes anyway, is all Batman. They're all basically Batman, but a different kind of Batman, right? Batman
people
written by a different person.
You're Batman. People with flaws, have Batman
right.
type tendencies.
Yes, Batman type tendencies. Oh my god, I would love to be a psychologist and be able to diagnose people with that.
Ooh,
Well, Mortimer, everything came back clean, but it says here you got a tendency to dress up in tights and punch criminals in the face. So we're gonna put you on a script of kryptonite. And, we'll see how that goes.
Oh man.
I'm not saying you're Batman yet. Now listen, nobody's accusing you of being Batman, but we've checked, and it seems that there are some things about your background that make us think you could eventually develop into a Batman.
Telltale signs.
Telltale signs of Batmanism. Were your parents
Batmanism.
in front of you?
Batmanism.
Number 1.
Oh man, all right.
Are you very, very rich? Number 2. Are your parents dead? Number 3. Were they murdered by a person that could later be retconned into the joke? Well, those are the 3 things. You don't have to retcon it, but you can. That's the important thing.
All right.
All right, so without further ado, let's jump into the first issue
Okay.
of Watchmen, the limited series by Alan Moore and David Gibbons.
All right.
So, how do we start out, Sam? Where do we start?
Well, first off, I mean, we have a lot of blood on the screen. Well, actually, you know what? We have blood on the streets with a smiley face. So let's just analyze that for a second. We don't actually know that this is blood, but something you got a smiley face on the streets, and a guy is just trying to wash off the blood off the sidewalk, and we have a guy saying the end is nigh. All in the same pretty much scene. The end. So smiley face with something that looks like something on the smiley face eyes. Blood on the sidewalk. A guy spraying the sidewalks, and a guy in a red-headed guy walking over the blood. The end is nigh. Come on now.
And I also want to point this out about this first page, and I mean this will be a long recap if we keep doing this. But the guy that's spraying off the blood, he flips off the dude with the sign after he walks through the blood. I don't know if you noticed that on panel 4 there. He's flipping him off.
Man,
like, hey,
yeah.
What are you doing? He's flipping him off.
Walking right through it. Instead of walking right around it, he just walks right through it. You're in my way. Right, exactly.
I'm spraying you.
Oh, man. But,
all right.
Yeah, so we get introduced to the 9-panel 9-frame structure, which this page is actually 7 panels, but it tells us how this story is actually going to be framed. So that's pretty interesting. In a lot of other comics, this is sort of like the way actually back in the 80s and pretty much just back then period, comics were structured, just tightly structured in different frames. This 9-panel frame, the structure is pretty much the way that's just going to be, the story's just going to be told throughout the whole graphic novel.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot to, that structure is something to pay attention to as far as how it's used and how it's used throughout the book, because there's some characters are presented a lot more in the 3x3 frame, and some are presented in more splashy, less boundaries, so to speak.
Right.
So that's something to pay attention to is the method, right?
Right.
And that's something. It's something that is borrowed from these sort of superhero tales that, Watchmen's sort of like the last chapter in a Golden Age superhero story that starts with,
That's a great way to put it.
The murderer at the chemical plant, Ace Chemicals or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happened here? That blood is from a guy named Eddie Blake. And Eddie Blake is a guy who is noted as being built like a pro wrestler in his 50s. So he's enormous. Mm-hmm. He's basically like Schwarzenegger 20 years ago, right? Like they made T3 and someone like threw Schwarzenegger out of a building. So it's not a little thing, right? What they're saying is this is a crazy thing. And they're talking to each other about like how to get out the window. They're like, he must have been running at full speed. So they think that it's but there's other damage indicating there was a fight. So these cops who are talking to each other about, what do you think happened, right? They're kind of piecing some of it together.
Right.
Right, a little bit of it. And you're seeing it in sort of they kind of show you this in sort of like interjecting frames, right?
Yeah,
the way the cops kind of figuring it out.
Yeah, the way in the movie, like, you're cutting to this, as the story is as the characters speaking, the two cops are investigating, they're like cutting to, what they think actually happened, and it's actually going into the the guy kicking the door down and the guy punching Eddie, and it's just going back and forth between what they believe actually happened. Now, whether it actually happened this way, we don't know, but this is what they 8 times out of 10, maybe it did happen that way, but this is what they're deducing it to be.
So they basically figure, oh well, who's this guy? No one really knows. Who knows? Maybe it was a bunch of gang guys came in here and beat him up and threw him out the window, right? A bunch of quote unquote not tops or KT-28s or lewds. The name of the gangs. And then, so they leave and they say, who cares about Rorschach? He's still active. And then, Rorschach, they say Rorschach's crazy, and they walk by the dude with the end is nigh sign, right? The redhead guy. So, next page, Rorschach's investigation starts, right?
Right.
So, Rorschach shows up, and he finds the button with a little blood on it. And then, the way they tell this story here, I know we talked about how you like this, right? How this is like one of your favorite things.
Right. Just to cut back a little bit, too, keep an eye on that in this Nye guy. So, this is the second time he'd appeared within just the, within the scene period and everything. So, let's keep an eye on that guy. All right, go ahead.
Quite an interesting piece of background.
Yes, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Foreshadowing. So Rorschach shows up and he's got a gas-powered grappling gun. Mm-hmm. So he climbs his way up into Blake's apartment. And Rorschach is an interesting-looking dude, right? He's got a trench coat and a scarf and pinstriped long, vertical pinstripe like suit pants.
Yeah.
He wears. But his number one thing. And this is the neatest thing about him. His number one thing is a mask, and the mask changes shape. Like his face changes shape, like a Rorschach test is where he gets his name. Mm-hmm. So it's like an ink blot test, and it changes. And they manipulate it in the book. They manipulate it. They kind of make it change his facial expression. So it's almost like the mask is sort of reacting to things, right?
Right.
It's super interesting.
Yeah, I was telling Scott that I love the way that that this 9-panel structure actually tells, especially in this scene with no dialogue, with Rorschach going into like the apartment. It's just amazing how he uses that grappling hook to to go all the way up that building. I don't know if anyone on the street notices. It must be way past midnight or whatever, because he's going right up this building into the apartment. And is beginning his investigation. So the police done their investigation. Now it's time for Rorschach to do his. There's no dialogue, but you could tell exactly everything that's going on in the scene. And at midnight, all the agents. That's the way that's what the title of the story is. So he goes through different things as far as like looking through drawers and looking in the bedroom, and then finally he comes upon a closet. Mm-hmm. And he's pushing around and he's just trying to find, okay, well, what's going on with this closet? And one of the things I was saying is that it's just it's funny how he's grunting, making noises, and it's really a telling sign as to, okay, he's discovered, he happens upon something. So he gets his hanger and finally finds a way into the find the false door, to the closet, right. Pushes a button, and here we go. We find comedian's arsenal, his costume.
That thing on the bat cave that goes and comes up when you hit the button.
Oh yeah,
that's what shows up. It's that. So it's got his outfit and his mask, and you can see all his weaponry and everything. Mm-hmm. And Rorschach also finds a picture in there, a black and white sepia tone picture of superheroes from the old days. these would be Golden Era superheroes. 1939 was about 46 years before the setting, so almost 50 years before the setting of this story.
Right.
But it's I think it's implied that one of these pictured characters is Eddie Blake. Like this is what Eddie was really up to, right?
Right.
And that that's kind of what that is. So, but it's all told in silent panels, and he does a few things that are super duper interesting as far as, like we said with the hanger, right? Mm-hmm. So he uses the hanger to measure how deep the closet is from the outside and the inside, and can tell that there's a space back there, right? A hidden space.
Right.
So that's super duper new. I just think that's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, it really is just the way Alan Moore and especially Dave Gibbons, the way they interpreted the whole scene and everything. And then towards the end of that, as they're looking at the costume heroes, the Masked Avengers, has Eddie Blake pictured. He lays everything out on the floor, and is thinking, it's nothing more. You really don't have an idea what he's thinking, or I'm sorry, exactly wordage of what he's thinking. But and we're not being handheld as to what's going on here in this scene. It really leaves it up to the reader to just interpret, okay, well, he's just trying to find out what's going on. He doesn't know exactly what's going on yet, but he's laying out all the evidence.
Mm-hmm. He's getting a whole picture.
Yes.
He's looking at things like, so the cops, like if you look at how they're drawn, they're sort of looking at things from from like a tabletop position, right? Straight ahead.
Uh-huh.
And if you look at Rorschach's getting the information together and getting it all together and looking at the whole picture and thinking why, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So or Hal also, that's the other thing is like, it would be something if like someone got murdered in a brutal beating and you found out they were like a Batman. You know what I mean? Like
right.
Well, this guy got murdered and he's Batman. All of a sudden, it'd be like, well, wait a minute. I've watched Batman do some crazy stuff. Like Batman is not going to be an easy kill, Right.
And whoever did this, and we don't know yet, but whoever did this, it really is really got some, some big ball.
I mean, come on.
To take out Batman.
I mean, this is big game hunting.
Right.
To go after not just a Batman, by the way, because we'll find out, some of this is going to be things we'll discover through the course of the story, but a Batman who did not pull a lot of punches. He wasn't a nice Batman.
Not at all.
Not your friendly neighborhood Batman.
Not your friendly neighborhood Batman, huh?
So the scene transitions here, and it uses the picture.
Mm-hmm.
The picture of the old-timey superheroes to transition, and it transitions over to Night Owl 1 having beers with Night Owl 2. And these are Hollis Mason, who is a Golden Era superhero, and Dan Dryberg, who is like a Silver Era superhero.
Right.
And they're having beers and talking about stuff like, Hollis telling him stories about, the Screaming Skull and, and all these guys. They basically get together and trade old stories about when they were both the Night Owl, Nite, and they were Night Owl 1 and 2.
Right.
And some of the differences, and this is sort of a meta take on these things. Some of the differences between Night Owl 1 and 2. Night Owl 1's a kinetic hero. He's punching and kicking and finding and looking and doing those things. He's a very, verb. He's
right.
a verb, so to speak. And Dryberg is more of like a gadgets and tech and, you know what I mean?
Right.
Sort of things like that.
He's what you would call the Batman of today as far as the gadget is concerned. So
right.
that was his thing. So the two Night Owls are sort of like the split of what Batman is. Batman is a gadget and a kick butt,
Yep.
whereas these two, they're pretty much just different takes on the same different versions on the same, Night Owl.
Right. So it's like
different approaches. Okay, go ahead.
Hollis is a puncher,
mm-hmm.
and Dan has the owl computer is the way to think of it.
Right. To two different approaches to crime fighting.
Yes, and so they basically talk and they say, oh man, ever since '77 things have really slowed down because that's when the Keene Act was passed. More to come on the Keene Act.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I guess when these younger heroes got retired. So there's this sort of this. One thing about Watchmen that's interesting is it's a generational story. Mm-hmm. So there's this idea that there was a first generation of these Max Adventures and a second.
Right.
And you're finding out that, the second generation of heroes were retired not by choice.
Right.
Like they were not, they were told to stop.
They were told to stop, yes.
They were told to stop. So Dryberg goes home and guess who's waiting for him sitting in his kitchen eating a bunch of beans.
I'm all bean juice guy.
Rorschach.
He's always there when you don't need him to be.
Whenever you need a cop, he's around. Rorschach's
Oh
around.
man, yeah.
Never you don't. He's just jumping in your house, stealing your sugar cubes and your beans.
Oh yeah. And to back up a little bit, we get throughout these scenes with Night Owl and both Night Owls and everything, younger and older, we get little things in the panels just to foreshadow and tell about different things. It's just really crazy and just interesting how Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons just puts Easter eggs, if you want to call them Easter eggs, but just put things in the story that just that resonate throughout like the whole story. Like in the one panel, you get him leaving the first Night Owl's apartment, and it's who watches the Watchmen, graffiti on the side of the wall. That'll be something to foreshadow later. And then in the a couple panels after that on the next page, you got like some gang members who are like, will be able to be foreshadowed later. And then as Scott said, we see Dan meet Rorschach right in his house. How did he break into his house or to his home? He's there eating some beans.
Beans. He's like, hey, Rorschach, you want me to heat those up? And he's like, no, I don't want you to heat these beans up. Heat is decadent. Sorry.
Christian Bale sounding Rorschach.
I can only do one impression. I don't know what you want from me. So Dryberg says, is that bean juice on that button? And he's like, it's human bean juice.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. So Rorschach says, hey, I'm warning you because the comedian got killed by someone who could be hunting masks. Like, we're all in this fraternities, kind of, is the way they think of it. And Dryberg says, whatever happened to us, whatever happened to those great times. And Rorschach tells him, you quit. He leaves him sitting there with his Night Owl costume sort of, hanging there.
Yeah, I mean, Rorschach is pretty much going through his place. Just he's doing his own investigations as but he wants to also warn Dan about what he thanks is happening. So right. He goes into like the basement and where all Dan's gadgets are and everything, and they're basically just talking about like old times and what's going on and everything, and Rorschach is just basically multitasking. He's filling him out, but at the same time he knows Dan is just a goody good, so he has no reason to be a suspect in the comedian's murder, but he's basically just filling him out and telling him about and warning him about you better basically just watch yourself. Yep.
He's the warning, the signal warning is what he's trying to do here. So Rorschach, and the next day sort of he says, oh, the comedian's dead, and Rorschach is sort of concerned that this is someone going after Old Mass, either to silence him or settle an old debt or something like that. So he goes to essentially a villains bar. That's what I got from this. All the villains hang out in this one place.
Oh man, that's just something that you may see on like Super Friends or some old cartoons where all the villains are. It just happens to be all the villains and bad guys are hanging out in one spot. How does that happen?
And then the dude that owns the place where all the villains and bad guys are is like, Rorschach, what are you doing here? Like, he doesn't come in all the time.
An announcer, he got his own announcer.
Right? Rorschach, hey! Don't kill anybody. Like, he actually says that to him. Please don't kill anybody.
Oh, man, that is funny.
It's a tough bar. And then, so Rorschach messes a dude up. It's disrespectful. Like, breaks his fingers and says, anybody else? Anybody know anything? He keeps breaking fingers. But he's like, nope, didn't know anything. All right, see ya. Then he walks out of this bar. And you kind of get an idea why people aren't super happy about Rorschach, right? Like, his methods are
right
fairly direct.
Yeah, he was with the first batch of Costume Avengers, and then he lasted. He didn't get forced out like the other ones.
They couldn't shut him down.
They couldn't shut Rorschach down, so he's still out there fighting the good fight. Going into like the dark, dirty holes and making things happen. He's a true man of action.
That's what he is. Dark, dirty places, just beating people up. That's why he got into the business.
So he has his Batmanism.
So Rorschach's an interesting case because there's this whole question of why did you start doing this, and Rorschach's why is so different than everybody else's. He's here to punish people. He's here to show you what you were wrong and make you understand that you were very wrong.
Right.
Sorry.
I mean, he sees the world in just two ways, of black and white. There's no gray. Hence his whole mask. So
it's a whole thing.
That's the whole thing, and the mask just change. It's funny how the mask changes in different panels, because that really. If you want to just look at it a little bit, that really is the gray, because things do change. Although you never see the mask colors change into gray. It's still black and white, but because it's changing, things do change Rorschach. So it's just ironic how you see things in two different ways, but things just always change.
Yep. So the right thing's not always the right thing.
Right. Exactly.
But there always is a right thing. There's no need to compromise. No compromise.
Never compromise.
Compromise.
Not even in the face of Armageddon.
Never. Not even then. So that's Rorschach. So Rorschach is also going to warn Adrian Veidt. And Veidt is the real name of a costumed adventurer from the 60s and 70s named Ozymandias.
All right.
And Ozymandias' shtick is that he's the smartest man in the world. That's his whole thing. That's what
right.
he says he is. And he is a very rich man. He's parlayed his sort of intelligence into business success. He has sort of, I don't know, licensed himself and the other guys in the Crime Busters. And so they have like toys and dolls. And so that superhero media is starting to show up, and it's because of Veidt, right?
Yeah.
Adrian Veidt started to push that forward.
Yeah, you definitely capitalized on the whole genre,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he's the only one. No one's in on it. So,
right.
all that comic book money from the 70s is just sitting there waiting for Adrian. I mean, it's funny now that they're, these things are billion-dollar properties. It's like funny, but
yeah, exactly.
So in the 70s.
so he's an element of Batman, if we want to call it that. He's the rich. While Batman and Bruce Wayne didn't, profit. Batman didn't make his own toys and everything, but he's sort of like the the tycoon. Vet is on everything as far as Wayne.
Yep.
Wayne stuff, Wayne Tech is on everything. This is the element of Batman that's in this particular character, Ozymandias.
Yes. The playboy, the millionaire playboy.
Exactly.
So it's separated. It's also that other angle of Batman.
Right. And the world knows who he is.
They do. He unmasked himself before the Keene Act. And he came out and he says, I don't know, maybe it was the Soviets. Rorschach's like, who do you think killed him? He's like, I don't know, the Soviets? Who knows? He was a Nazi. That's what he says about. He's like, the comedian sucked. Like, who cares? And
one thing about the Keene Act, why did that come about again?
The Keene Act came about because the police went on strike because the vigilantes wouldn't let them do their jobs. So the policemen went on strike, and then the vigilantes there were just riots and riots and riots, and then the Keene Act outlawed them. In 1977.
All right.
So 8 years before this. That's how long everybody except for Rorschach was active.
So this is what happens when real life consequences gets into mixing fantasy and everything. So as we discussed earlier, superhero comics fail. So it just brought about Masked Adventures in this particular universe. They were actually committing really acts of crime. They were vigilantes doing, putting their own sense of justice without, consulting the police, and just putting their own brands of justice in effect. And it eventually just got out of hand to where the government had to intervene, and hence the Keene Act.
Well, think about this too. I mean, if let's say I get a confession out of someone, right?
Right.
And in order to do that, I had to beat the living I had to beat them up real good. You know what I mean?
Right.
I had to mess them up, broke their leg or something. Dumped them off at the police station with the recording of it. None of that's admissible. Right? That's torture. You can't. It's like it violates like the Fourth Amendment or whatever. Like you can't do that. So
right.
So that's the other thing is there's these procedural things. So these guys are probably getting away. And so in order to solve the problem, you have to start doing the Rorschach method, which, as we find out, is just killing people.
Yeah, pretty much.
And that's a big change. When they start just 86ing guys, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot different from how it was before when you turn them into police and you still let the state have the power, the authority of the final prosecution and determination. But when you start pulling that out, that's totally different.
Things are just going too far, so you had to find a way to regulate it. So the government had to just create the Keene Act to keep things in line and pretty much just force them out of adventuring, as they call it.
Yes, get them back into line. So now,
except for Rorschach,
who can't be brought into line because they can't figure out who he is or what he's doing or catch him or anything like that. He's just careful. So now we're going to do something different. So this is something that's different. It's designed to feel different when he does what's about to happen. He goes to warn Dr. Manhattan against the mass killer, right? Because Dr. Manhattan's girlfriend is Silk Spectre 2. And Silk Spectre 2 is she's the daughter of Silk Spectre 1. Mm-hmm. Silk Spectre 1 is in the picture that we've seen before of the old-timey Avengers. Although you can't really see her. She's kind of obscured, which I'm guessing is on purpose. So she's in that picture.
Right.
And Silk Spectre 2 was chained by her mother and sort of pushed into mass adventurism. It's like the family business for her. She does not care for it.
Did we state that they were called the Minutemen? Or
we didn't talk about if they were the Minutemen or
the people in the Costume Avengers first batch were called the Minutemen, who comedian and like Scott was alluding to, the first Silk Spectre was a part of.
Yes, Night Owl 1. So everybody that was active, this is essentially the Justice Society of America, right? The DC Justice Society of America. Mm-hmm. It's sort of its own thing. Active during World War II. They had like a clubhouse and stuff and parties. Anyway, it was a whole thing where they were chill. So that's who Laurie is. And her boyfriend is Dr. Manhattan. Now, Dr. Manhattan is different from everybody else because he's not a masked adventurer. He actually has superpowers. So he's not relying on like intelligence or super speed or something like that. He just has he's basically God. I mean, he can control all matter.
He's actually Superman.
Yeah.
This is this world's Superman. If you want to think about someone who can do anything and, just the all powerful, and like Scott said, he's basically looked upon as like a god but he's an American god.
Yep.
He's America's guy, and that'll be something that's also emphasized also in this story.
Yes. So just to kind of show you, just to talk a little bit about who Dr. Manhattan is, just because we're going to get into more detail. There's like a whole issue about him, so I'm going to save a lot of the details for that. But just to kind of recap some of the stuff he does just during this little four-page little visit from Rorschach, who Laurie, Miss Jupiter hates Rorschach.
She detests this guy.
Hates him. Like, why are you here? What are you doing?
Oh, God, Rorschach is so condescending towards her, and she hates that. She's always hated that. Rorschach tends to be a really judgmental when it comes to the ways of the world and how it's changed and everything, and and as we've talked about, he sees the world in just a black and white. So if you have moral lapses, then you're bad.
Moral lapses.
Then pretty much you're bad. It's either you're bad or you're good. There's no in between. So not to Rorschach at least. And Rorschach, the whole argument with them is that there has to be some sort of you can't just go around just judging folks, which is pretty much Rorschach's shit. Thing between them two. He passes judgment.
He is judgment. That's Rorschach's whole deal, right? He shows up and he's the final say on what happens next, right? It's his whole thing.
Yeah, he makes this comment like, rape is a
moral lapse. He says, I don't want to talk about the moral lapses of men who died in service to their country. It's like, rape is a moral lapse? Like, my goodness.
Yeah.
So Dr. Manhattan says, all right, you're making my girlfriend mad. You got to go. And Rorschach says, I spent a lot of time getting in here. I'm not leaving before I've had my say. And Dr. Manhattan teleports him outside right before he finishes the sentence.
Yeah.
Just to the other side of the fence.
That's your say. Bye-bye.
Yeah. So he teleports him out. So Dr. Manhattan teleports him out. We see super strength, telekinesis. He makes himself, 50 feet tall and then, regular size. and he
all about being stark naked too. You know, he's
totally naked, totally naked. Doesn't even bother wearing clothes.
Dr. Manhattan is a free man. You know.
Yeah, he doesn't. He will not be constrained by boxers or briefs. We'll not do this to him. He's an adult man with his own visible blue genitalia. So,
and like Scott said, okay, you know, he just teleports him out, and all Rorschach has to say is Herm. You know, that's one little thing that I found funny throughout this whole thing.
Does he get back? Does he get angry? Does he say, "I'll get that Dr. Manhattan"? Nope. He just goes, "All right, see ya." He just walks off.
Right.
Oh man.
So we continue. Laurie and Dr. Manhattan just continue talking and everything, and Laurie's trying to really communicate with Dr. Manhattan, and we find out that Dr. Manhattan is really so far gone as far as his whole humanity. And that's one thing that we'll talk about later too. You know, Dr. Manhattan was once a human, you know, but he's lost his he's beginning to lose his humanity if he hasn't already lost it, and Laurie can't really communicate with him and make him feel in a way to where she can get some real empathy with him. So she just begins to reach out to Dan. Yep. They start talking about Dan, you know, as far as like the remember when we did this, remember when we did that, and she decides to reach out to him, and probably in not her own way of thinking, she pretty much is reaching out to another human, because this person that she knew was that she was infatuated with to begin with is not the same person that she fell in love with. So she's basically just reaching out. She wants to actually touch somebody, you know.
He's made it very clear that he's a lot more interested in finding the Gluino than talking to her. Mm-hmm. Like, he's like, you go to dinner with Dan, I don't want to go see Dan.
Right.
Which is definitely not something any couple ever has had a conversation like that.
Exactly.
Okay. So next she goes to Raphael's with Dan, and they have a nice dinner. And there's a frame here in the middle of page 25, issue page 25, where you can see two old guys kind of holding hands and cuddling in the foreground. Yeah, that's something we'll call back to later. Those guys are kind of important.
And that's what we keep talking about. Easter eggs planted throughout, just callbacks and foreshadowing and thing. The thing about this graphic novel is that you have to pay attention. And if you don't really pay attention the first time, you have an opportunity to keep reading and going back and just finding things that are really essential to the story. And you're just like, man, this is tightly put. Alan Moore at one point said this graphic novel is not filmable. It can never be put on a screen. So the way he structured it, the way him and Dave Gibbons structured it, is not to be put on a screen. You know, we'll find that, you know, a lot of people ignore that, but just admiring how this is put together and how you just have to pay attention to the story, because it tells stories within stories.
Mm-hmm. It's this, like, it's very complicated. It's a complex narrative. Yeah. And then Dan and Laura, they're talking about they're sitting here talking about Rorschach, and they're like, whatever happened to that guy who kept going over and being like, he kept being like, hey, I'm stealing from this. You got to stop me, right? He's like Captain Carnage, right?
Yeah. And
he says, whatever happened to that guy? And it's like, he tried that stuff with Rorschach, and Rorschach threw him down an elevator shaft. And they all laugh about it. A good laugh. It's like.
And then the first chapter ends, and the comedian is dead. You know, everybody gets a good laugh at that with that Rorschach comment. You know, the both of them, but the comedian is dead. So that's the way we end it. That's a hell of a way to end that first issue. You know. Yep. You talk about like the good old times, and you laugh about like the the adventures that And this, and as I was saying before, this is when Laurie and Dan are really, she's really connecting. She's been feeling a certain way for so long, being cooped up with Dr. Manhattan and not really getting any human contact. So finally, she's with a guy she can actually relate to, Yep. And they talk about the good old days and the good old times and stuff. Whatever happened to those, well. what do you expect? The comedian is dead. It's no, it's nothing to really laugh at anymore. You know. So, and the end quote of the first chapter is, at midnight all the agents and superhuman crew go out and round up everyone who knows more than they do. Quote from Bob Dylan song.
Yep.
Man.
Yep.
Some deepness going on here, guys, and some stuff to be told, as we end this first chapter here.
Indeed. And then we hear about Hollis Mason's Under the Hood Part 1, which is all about his origin and how he became Night Owl. And he starts saying, he tells this story about his dad worked at a mechanic, and he tells a story about how the head mechanic in this guy's office had carnal knowledge of his wife Beatrice, and he and he killed himself with this, he started a car engine and ran a hose to the cab, right? And he says that's the saddest thing he could think of. And that story tells you a lot about Hollis Mason, or Night Owl 1.
Right.
Hollis is a hero primarily because he doesn't want bad things to happen.
Right.
He
has a heart of goodness. So, he just doesn't want things to happen, and, will risk his life to do that. A hero.
Yes. And he becomes a policeman. And then Hood of Justice shows up first, so he doesn't even try to claim to be the first one. So Hood of Justice shows up in fall of 1938, and then Hollis decides, I'm gonna get ready, and I'm gonna become Night Owl.
Right.
Start punching people in the head because he got named Night Owl because he stopped going to he wouldn't ever go out for drinks with his buddies,
right?
Because he had to go home and be Night Owl. He's busy.
Yeah. So I mean the real, with this universe being, is I guess a substitute for real life and everything. This is a decision that he makes. Whereas what came before Watchmen, you just had a lot of tropes. You didn't really deal with like a lot of consequences and a lot of the really little idiosyncrasies that happen when a person put on that mask. Going out for drinks. I want to actually go out and be a hero, Something like that wasn't talked about, with a Batman or a Superman or even a Spider-Man, for that instance. Well, Spider-Man, Stan and Steve, they really gotten into like a lot of the good stuff as far as like, humanizing. But for the DC characters, you really didn't have that. Yep. They were dealing with a lot of space stuff and just craziness that you really wasn't so much down to earth. Watchmen just threw all that out the window. Okay, if a hero decides he wants to go and play hero, he had to sacrifice some things. Sacrifice being like a good friend, a good husband, just actual person to actually go out and really sacrifice himself for the good of the city, which is what this first Night Owl did.
Yep. I agree. He's like Batman from, he's like the archetypal Batman. He's Batman from Batman the Animated Series. That's his motivation.
Yeah. I mean, another sense of Batmanism.
Why are they all Batman?
These are all various takes on what Batman could have been. That's just crazy. One thing I did want to say, the first book ends with that, but the way that they do these little extra, extensions in the chapters, they present Under the Hood as actually a book. This is a book that the Hollis Mason had written about his costume adventuring, and it actually would have been pretty nice to have actually a real book, regarding this. But it's the graphic novel is interspersed with, well, at least his first part is interspersed with excerpts from that actual book that he wrote. So the way that I heard it was, Alan Moore only had and Dave Gibbons only had enough material for like 6 issues, and they decided, but DC wanted like 12 issues. They wanted like a bigger story, so they had to find out a way to delve in a little bit more to what was going on inside the book. So they decided to come up with these different excerpts like throughout like the whole 12 issues, and to fill more pages. So they came up with the Hollis Mason wrote a book, so we're going to actually put the book in the book. So I thought that was pretty decent.
And it fleshes out so many of the details, you know.
Yes.
And like I said, this is a generational story, so it's important to understand that, you know, the effect of these mass vigilantes is being felt, you know, in a large way throughout the whole world. And sort of America's comfortability and reliance on Dr. Manhattan is in many ways sort of an outcropping of this peculiarity in their timeline, where they have these mass adventurers instead of stories about them.
Right.
So they were like sort of bred to trust these super beings.
And and as far as this Under the Hood, I mean, it's a really good way for him to tell the story from his perspective. Everybody has a perspective in this story. So from Hollis Mason's perspective in this book, we get his interpretation of what he thought. He was getting into meeting Hooded Justice, and did he talk about Sil Spectre in this first chapter? Because this happened way back in the
I think he mentions it. I think he maybe mentions that she shows up, and it's weird.
Yeah. I think he talked about his father and everything too. Yeah, basically, it just basically gives his perspective of what was going on back then in the 30s, in the late 30s. And when Superman actually just came out, as far as the comic book, I think.
Yep.
And how it related to it talks about Action Comics and how, how that came about and how that pretty much died, and then that's when the Masked Avenger started just taking over and everything. So yeah, good excerpt from his perspective.
Yeah, and that's it. That's pretty much it for issue 1. Watchmen.
Right. Yeah, tight first issue, and it really sets up sets everything up for what's to come, and it's just some real grounded stuff. We get a sense of this is a murder mystery first and foremost. Regardless of all the politics and everything, as far as like all the mass adventuring and what's going on back then, this is first and foremost sets out who murdered the comedian.
Yep.
So that's basically what this first issue is telling us about. There are different elements that's going into it, and different people that are involved, but we are about to find out what's going on.
Yep. And that we're going to find out that, the comedian's murder is tied into this game of world brinksmanship that we're watching Richard Nixon play.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Richard Nixon's the president, guys. It's a different timeline.
And it spreads it spreads far and beyond. So, Nixon gets elected to a third term. We'll find out how that happened,
Over and over. Richard Nixon's back again.
Okay. So, we thank you guys for, going with us on this first episode, and, we'll be back, to do the next chapter.
Well, first let's direct them back to our email address. Let's do that.
Yeah, let's, we're going back to the, email address, at, watchingwatchmen@nerdcyclopedia.com.
Our own domain. That's how you know we're legit.
Oh, man, we are so legitimate. Follow us on different social media platforms at, Nerdcyclopedia. And, just give us, the 5 stars like Scott said. And, if you don't,
I'm going to give you the business.
Oh, man, will he?
Let me do a brief description of what the business is. It's cold, and it's dark, and it's going to last the rest of your life.
Heartless.
Heartless business.
All right, guys. See you when we see ya.
Thanks for watching with us.